In this video, I'm going to show you how I constructed the facings for the jacket that I'm creating with you. This is my neckline facings, my two front facings, and then my upper collar. Okay, these are all going to be attached to be sewn to the jacket. Make sure you interfaced, fusible interfaced all of these pieces. So your two jacket front facings, upper collar, and back neckline facing. I'm going to stay stitch my back neckline facing. I'm going to stay stitch the neckline of my two front facings, okay, so all the way down here, because we're going to be clipping into these things eventually, and we don't want it to stretch out. So the first thing I'll do is stay stitch all these. So stay stitch the neckline. Here's the neckline of my front jacket. You saw the lapel there. And I'm going to stay stitch the bottom edge of my back neckline facing just to help me know exactly where I'm sewing my lining to it. And then I'm stay stitching, this is the front of my jacket lapel. I'm going to stay stitch that as well. I have a corner I'm going to clip in down here. You guys don't need to worry about that. But I'm just going to stay stitch. And then this is my collar, top collar. I'm stay stitching all the way around my collar, top collar. Okay. And then you're gonna stay stitch it at whatever your seam allowance is. So if you have 1/2 inch, you want to stay stitch at a weak 1/2 inch. So like instead of, you'll do like 7/16. Okay, so they're all, now I'm gonna join my front neckline facing to the shoulder of my two front jacket facings. Okay, so the facings with your lapels. I'm just gonna put them together. Now, if you're confused of how to, and then sew at a 1/2 inch, if you're confused how to attach them, if you're not sure what, if you're attaching them right, lay out your jacket shell and lay everything in there how it would be, and you'll know exactly how to do it. All right, so there it is. They've been sewn. I'm going to press open those shoulder seams. So essentially, this is basically the front part of my jacket and the very back neckline that I've just created very quickly. Okay, and those are your facings. All right, now we're ready to attach the top collar. All right, so what you want to do is find your center back at the neckline, okay? Because what we did is we created our neckline when we sewed all our facings together. So there's my center back notch there and there. Put right sides together, and now pin, okay, starting at your center back. Make sure they're perfectly lined up. And then you'll start pinning out, okay? So match shoulder seam to shoulder seam. I have a corner when I'm sewing on my collar that I need to watch out for. I don't think any of you do have that corner. But yeah, and you'll have some ease, okay? Your collar should be a little bit bigger than your neckline, and we want that. So put your collar against the feed dogs when you sew it. So once you've pinned it all together, go ahead and stitch it together at a 1/2 inch. Be careful that all your seam allowances stay open. Don't let them fold over, all right? So that will create a lot of bulk you don't want. And you can see I have some ease in that collar. That's the side that's against the feed dogs. But as I stitch, it just eases it right in, okay? If you have lots and lots of ease, that's an issue. You shouldn't have lots and lots of ease. I have about maybe 1/8, 1/4 at most, but even 1/4 is almost too much. So just go slow. The shoulder seams are the hardest part. because fabric kind of bunches up there, and you have to go slow and kind of smooth as you go and kind of really work that fabric through that part. And this is my corner, which I've already clipped into, and I stay stitched. So I'm going to stitch right down to that corner, and then put my needle down right when I get the point, lift my foot up, turn everything. Sorry, I'm like looking closer so I can see what I'm doing exactly, so camera went off. And there we go. Continue stitching. Take a couple stitches just to get it very accurate. Now I'm turning everything, moving all the fabric out of the way so it's nice and flat. And then continue stitching. Okay, so now we're going to clip out the seam allowance of our shoulder seam allowance, and that's just in the area where we stitched, okay? So see how this shoulder seam allowance goes into the neckline? We're just clipping that out, and that's reducing bulk. And now we're going to press that neckline over. So here is where my collar attaches to my lapel. I'm pressing that open. And that's the corner I stitched. Okay, folded that back out of the way, and now I'm pressing open the neckline. Okay, so this is where my collar attached to the facing. So here we might have to do some clipping. When we get to the more rounder part, okay? Because if you think about it, our neckline is very round versus our collar, which was pretty straight if you're comparing the two curves. And so in there where it gets nice and tight, we're going to clip right down to our stitching line, but not through it, okay? And just do this through the curved area. Don't do it where it's flat. You don't need to stitch, or you don't need to clip where it's flat. Just in the curved area so that the seam allowance can really open up how it wants to and give you a nice smooth seam back there. There we go. Okay, so now it's been sewn, or pressed. I'm just looking at the form real quick. That looks good. Okay, so now let's take our jacket shell. And what we need to do is trim out the inner facing, the hair canvas, out of the hemline, okay? Because we're eventually going to add in our hemline facing, so this is a good point to take this out. All right, so if your seam allowance is a 1/2 inch, we're going to trim out, you know, like 9/16 to 5/8. Probably trim out 5/8, okay? Because we do not want that canvas going into the seam allowance when we stitch on our hemline facing. It's just too bulky, all right? So trim it right out of there. Okay, so now let's put our facing on our jacket. So take your jacket, lay it right side up. And now let's take our facing, and we're going to put right sides together. Okay, so right side down on top of your jacket. Find the center back on your collar. So you should have on your under collar a seam, your center back seam, and then on your upper collar just a notch. Find those two, match them up, and pin it together. and then you're going to pin out from there, okay? Pin out in one direction all the way, and then pin out in the other direction all the way, okay? And just line them up. And if everything went correctly, they should line up pretty easily. And then pin down your collar to your notch where your collar and your lapel match up. And be careful pinning here. Make sure you're lining up exactly where your lapel on your jacket and the lapel on your facing come together. And I'm talking about where the lapel and collar split. Okay, so you're matching up your lapels, your two lapels perfectly, and your two collar parts perfectly. Now here, as we reach the hem, make sure you leave about 2 inches open that you don't sew together at the hem, okay? So meaning on when you're sewing your facing to your jacket, down by the hem, leave like 2 inches where you don't sew the facing to the jacket, because depending on how your hem and facing are come together, it will make it easier for you to be able to sew your hem facing on later. Okay, so don't leave about 2 inches open. Okay, here I'm just being more accurate about pinning together the facings at the lapel and collar split, because I need to get right where I'm putting them together. So here we go, sewing on the facings to the jacket. All right, so I'm basically just going to start on one side and go around for the most part. Okay, and what I mean there is, like, I'm going to start at the hem and I'm going to sew up to where my lapel and collar split, and then I'll stop, and then I'll start sewing from that split but on the collar side. Keep watching and you'll see. All right, now if you have corners and stuff, what I like to do is when I get to the corner, I take 1 or 2 stitches diagonally across the corner and then come back up. So I would say just continue watching this now, and you can see how I stitch, through the corners and then up to the lapel and jacket, or excuse me, lapel and collar, where the notches and where they stop stitching together, and you can see how the stitching goes. Also notice that the twill tape, okay, I'm not stitching on the twill tape. I'm right against it, okay. We do not want to stitch the twill tape into our seam allowance. When we applied this, we applied it so that it would not be in the seam allowance. So be careful not to catch it in there. All right, that will add bulk and thickness into the seam allowance and create strange bumps, and your lapel won't look correct. So you want to stay away from. You don't want to stitch that in. Okay. And now you can see I'm coming up on the corner of my lapel, so I stop right before I get there, put my needle down, and then I'm going diagonally across it. I'm taking like a stitch or 2, and then lifting my foot again, needle down, and then coming across the rest of the way. And now here's where it's really important to stitch very carefully. Move your seam allowance out of the way, okay? Make sure you watch the other video I showed of attaching the facing to the jacket, because you can probably see a little more with more detail what I'm doing. by moving all the seam allowance out of the way so I can get right into what we called when we were drafting this point E, all right, where your lapel and collar separate. So just be very careful, stitch right in there. And then now I'm going to do it with the collar as well. And I'm getting right in there. And I'm just taking a couple stitches. Now, if you are not able to get in there for whatever reason perfectly, okay, and you have a little bit of a hole when you're done, that's okay. All right. The important thing is that everything matches up correctly, and that when you turn this inside out, finish all your clipping, and then turn it inside out, and then press it, it's laying flat. Okay. We don't want it to be bunched or pulling some strange way or something like that. Okay, so that's the important thing. If you have that hole, all right, when you're done and everything's laying correctly though, that's not a big deal. You can simply just take your thread and a hand needle and stitch that closed. Okay. So better, if you're not able to get in like you need to, better just to have that hole, little hole. It should not be a huge half-inch hole. I mean, even a quarter-inch might be big, all right? But anyways, that can be done by hand sewing it. All right, so here I'm just finishing off. So I just sped up the video so you can see me go down and finish it. And you'll see here I am coming up on the end, and notice that my facing is kind of hanging from my jacket for about 1 inch to 2 inches here. Again, because I don't want to stitch it all the way down because it'll be difficult to attach my hem facing. All right, so leave a few inches. Leave an inch or two. Don't leave more than 2 inches. Okay, so now that it's stitched on, I have a corner here I have to clip. I think none of you have this corner. It's because of my design I have that. Okay, but I'm going to trim back at all my other corners. All right. So these corners I have, which you also most likely don't have because this is because of my design. I'm just trimming out the seam allowance a little bit, and I'm not trimming too close because I don't want my fabric to disintegrate. If I trim too close to my stitches, they'll tear out. So I'm just trimming the bulk out of those corners because if you think about it, when this folds right side out, all that seam allowance is going to fold into those corners. So here we are at my lapel. I'm trimming out corner. Sorry for the bad camera angle here. And I'm trimming away the seam allowance a little bit diagonally. Okay. There we go. And there we go. All right. This way, when I fold my fabric right side out, all that seam allowance can fit. I'm trimming out the center back seam on my under collar that's been caught in the seam allowance to reduce that bulk. Okay, and now we're going to press this open. So if any part of your seam is curved, okay, then you'll probably have to clip it a little bit. So if you have a design where the front of your jacket is curved, you'll probably have to clip. Just clip where it looks like it needs the clipping. What does that mean? Is like if it's kind of straighter, it might not need a clip. Or if you feel like you're having a hard time pressing it open well, then you might have to clip there. Okay, but if you just have flat seams, you do not need to clip. Only in curved seams. So here I'll just continue pressing this open. Okay, so here we are coming up jacket front to the lapel. Okay, you can see my lapel right there. Putting it on my sleeve board. And again, I'm just going to press this open. Right down to that point. Use steam as you're doing it. Give it a good press. And then there's my point of my lapel. And then I'm going to flip this. And now I'm going to press the top part of my lapel where the lapel comes into the collar and they split. And just give that a good press open. Okay, it's very important that you press all your seams open. Do not flip this right side out without pressing your seams open. Okay, you're gonna get a much nicer. Well, it'll be easier to press it all flat, but it'll be a much nicer looking lapel and collar. All right. Now here's my collar part where it separates from my lapel. Get that right on the sleeve board, and I'm going to press that open as best I can. And now the collar, I've moved up into there. I'll press that open. And there's the point of my collar where it's going down to the lapel. All right, now your collar, if your collar is really rounded or something, you may have to clip in here. Okay, and that's fine. But remember, don't clip if it doesn't need it, all right? So here I'm using my ham because I have a rounded area here, okay? But this is a very soft curve, okay? So most likely I'm not going to have to clip any of this. I can press it open very nicely and not have an issue. All right, now here I have like more of a tighter curve, so I'm going to clip in here a little bit. Okay, so that the seam allowance can open like it needs to, so I can get my nice curve there. And then you're just going to keep pressing until you get down to the end of your jacket. Okay, so now we're getting close to done. Are you done pressing? Yep. Now we're going to fold this right side out. Okay, and I'm going to use my point turner. Oops. Okay, and I'll use this to push out my lapel tips and my collar tips. You just stick it in and push it in out. You'll have to massage it out a little bit. All right. Push as much of it out by your finger first, and then it's just the ends, and then gently work it out. You get a nice tip. Okay. You just push it out. If you don't have a point turner, use something that's not too sharp and blunt. Okay, but comes to kind of a tip. Now, what we want to do, this is my facing side, and that's my jacket side. I want to make sure I pull back about a 16th to an 1/8 of my jacket to the facing side, all right? I don't want my facing to show on my jacket side. So you'll see, as I'm pressing here, I'm just kind of pulling back. I know it's sped up. I'm just pulling back that jacket, about that 16th of an inch. And you'll do that all the way around. And then once we get to our collar, okay, it's my under collar. Okay, here's my under collar. I want to pull that top collar back to the undercollar side that 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch. Because I don't want any of my undercollar showing at the front. Okay? And same thing here. I want this facing to be pulled back to the jacket side here of the lapel. All right? I don't want to see any of it. And so just make sure that, when you're pressing it, that you're doing that. Okay, once it's all pressed, go ahead and put the jacket on the form or yourself, and you can just take a look and see how it looks and see if things are laying correctly and how it looks. And you might have to fiddle with your facings and stuff to tuck them in because they're not attached to anything, so they'll be kind of flopping around. Remember, the shoulder pads are just basted in right now. Okay. That's looking pretty good. There it is. You've now attached your front jacket facing and upper collar.